Welcome back to Your Spectacular Life. I'm Jody Whites, your business coach, helping your business be nothing less than spectacular. I'm here with my panel of coaches from Women Empowering Women. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi there. And we are going to be talking about boundaries. Say no to get to yes. So that should be exciting. I know it's a challenge for, not only women, but men and most of us. So, yes, we're going to step in and, have this great conversation. Now, I'll start out by saying, because this is clearly linked with it, that people pleasing have their roots in unhealthy boundaries. And, we really think that we're being selfish if we're not giving that other person what they want, when they want it, the second they request it. And why don't I open it up to that? And if anybody has any comments or any experiences with their clients with people pleasing and having that very strong boundary.
Well, I can say something. What just comes to mind for me when you say that is this assumptions. Like we kind of get tangled in assumptions of what we think the other person wants or expects, and we just kind of, work so hard to try to please when clearer communication would probably just help not, go there in the first place. That's what first thing that comes to mind for me.
Right. And where do you think these assumptions come from?
I think from life, I guess, from all prior experiences. And I'm thinking like the pleasing is coming from being afraid of being rejected or excluded maybe, or something like that, but we make up all these things in our mind instead of having that clear communication with people.
Right. And, it's kind of interesting because I've heard that people pleasing really starts early in our childhood, socialization, especially women. Would anybody else like to talk about that?
Yeah, I'd like to add too that my experience with that people pleasing, that doing what is good for others, kind of has its root. Part of it, there's different places it comes from, but that the root of in childhood, in infancy, of how to protect ourselves, how to create or establish an experience that is safe, so that when if we're a child and we're not allowed to talk back, in quotes, air quotes, we're not allowed to express and say what we feel because we get in trouble, or we learn then not to freely express, and as an adult to maintain peace, to maintain our own protection, just subconsciously we'll may not feel free to express, for instance.
Yeah, I had a thought about how important belonging is and how easy it is to underestimate the importance of that in, American culture that prizes individualism perhaps more than any other culture and country in the world. But there have been studies done, and the psychological impact of shunning, of being, excised from the group. Um, the impact is as severe as physical torture on people's physiology. So to find a way to belong and also be yourself fully is a tension, I think, that carries through much of our lives. What is the balance? And the balance changes in every situation and with every group. So being true to yourself, being part of a larger entity seems to me kind of a human challenge, a deep human challenge.
Yeah, that's a great point, Gail, in that it does, you know, what we want to believe, but we want to be ourselves individually. We want to say whatever we want to say without having others look down upon us, criticize us, or judge us.
I think
Now, it's cute. Yeah, go ahead, Cynthia.
I think we also live in a culture that is highly competitive. And if we're not doing, we have that fear of missing out. But also, I think that it distorts our boundaries about what is healthy. What is a healthy work week? What is a healthy obligation to an employer or to a job, above and beyond, the air quotes 40 hours a week. It seems like that's just a starting. It's an implicit starting point, when in fact it's the whole point, in my view.
Right, and that is interesting. And having a healthy boundary to say, I put in my 40 hours, and that is all I'm going to give you. Now, what you're speaking about, Cynthia, really goes back to what Gail is speaking about, is being yourself. I mean, I would imagine if we have healthy boundaries, we could, state those requests. We could say, I can't do things now for you, which is, again, healthy, and it allows us to be an individual. But what gets in the way? Because I'm imagining that's the tension point. Would anyone like to speak about that? Yes, Susan.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when we go to set boundaries, I think at the least we fear upsetting someone, and at the most we fear abandonment. And Pia mentioned this, actually Gail mentioned this too, just this idea that someone may reject me and then I may feel this really primitive feeling of abandonment. And so how do we come to terms with that and still maintain healthy boundaries and find a way to assert ourselves and say what it is that we need with those underlying emotional issues underneath? And I think the first thing is really just knowing, like, those things get triggered when we set boundaries. We care about relationships. We want to be in connection with other people. And so how do we do that in a way where we can say what we need, as well as honor the other person and stay connected to them?
I would suggest that we develop language. If we're unaccustomed to saying no, to practicing saying no, like anything that we would practice if we were doing a presentation or anything else, or asking for the deal, to say, oh, just a couple of key phrases. Gosh, I'd really love to, I can't. That's such a fantastic idea. If I'd known sooner, anything will really do, and it softens it. You don't have to actually physically say no. It's just like, gosh, that's such a great opportunity. Think of me another time.
My path to this is about presence, and presence has to do with just being aware, having your attention on yourself, on ourselves, which at the root of this really is self-love. So how to be fully connected at heart with ourselves so that we feel our worth, our value. We just are inherently allowed to be. And then with that experience of that fullness, then it's almost that there's no boundaries actually need to be set, because we feel complete and whole, and we may not be afraid of being abandoned, of being judged, of not belonging, because we are whole.
That's a great point. I love the fact that when we value ourselves, it makes it much easier to speak up, and with this languaging, Cynthia, as well, to be able to soften, to be able to say, great, I'd love to, think of me another time, or I've got too much on my plate. I'd like to be able to focus on your request, but I can't at this time. Those are all great ways to do that. Now, going back, Pia, to self-love, or anybody else, what happens? We talk about valuing when you can speak up, but what other things happen when we have a pattern of unhealthy boundaries?
I just want to back us up a little bit to talk about why is it harder for women, and if so, why might that be? And I was just thinking, well, I don't know exactly when the law came about, when women were no longer legally property of men, either the property of the father or the property of the husband. But gee, it's not surprising that if you're legally considered to be someone else's property, that asserting your own boundaries is a challenge. And the history of that, and the way that history kind of is in us, even if we don't know like the facts about the legal system, I think it's the way that women have been treated for millennia. And issues around abortion rights, et cetera. Is your body your own? And then maybe on the positive side, I remember being a mom, which was a very desired outcome for me, and I had tried many times to hold a pregnancy. And the union I felt with this little being inside of me, and then of course when the baby comes out, I didn't want a boundary. The merger was very, very profound, and it felt really part of the gift of being a woman, to be one with another in that deep, deep way, in the way you are with your infant. Anyway, so it seems like boundaries and boundarylessness, there are pros and cons on either side. I just wanted to bring up that I think there are some really specific things about being a woman that makes boundary setting and lack of boundaries have a different kind of quality to it.
Yeah, and I think once, of course, that complete union when we just have a brand new child, and if like thinking about that journey then of them growing up, and I think we tend to, as women, also be more inclined to be kind of of service, caring, supporting. And then at some point, like I think it's easy to keep going with that, even when in other parts of our lives, or when the child actually becomes bigger and don't quite need us in the same way, to like start setting boundaries when we haven't had them so much. Like that's kind of an interesting navigation as well.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's easy for us to be connected with that relationship and hard to let them go and make mistakes and fall. But it also, I think, and deep down in our unconscious, it allows us to transfer that feeling onto another person of that deep connection. And those boundaries get very blurred. For example, with a partner, we bring that over to kind of expect that we're going to have that same deep experience. So we open ourselves to having weaker boundaries in order to have a deeper connection. And I don't think that's necessarily true. Deeper connection with others can't also include strong boundaries. In fact, it has to, so the relationship is healthy. Anybody else want to speak about that?
Well, yes, I agree, of course, that as women, we've come from this lineage of disempowerment and being owned, as Gail described, being property, being chattel in a way. But I would like to advocate for men as well. There are men that come from a background in their childhood, for instance, of abuse, of trauma, that do grow into having issues with boundaries, having these same that we're talking about, having these same experiences. So just to have that understanding that, not all men are strong and tough. They may put on that appearance, but they have emotions and they struggle, and they can struggle with it. So Yeah.
I think control, when I've sensed men and women trying to impinge on my boundary, I think it's a question that they want to somehow control you, or I don't know, that is the feeling I get. Would anybody agree with that?
Yeah, that control can come from so many different places, even from fear, right? From just to make themselves feel safe, they have to control. Or I would think that, because at the core of everything, for me, it's love and fear. And so, are we in love and fulfilled and connected and all in a healthy way? If not, then we're maybe in fear. And from there, all these emotions, all these experiences, all these reactions that may not appear to be fear, they may be very aggressive and strong, but the root is fear.
Yeah, that kind of takes me back to Cynthia's earlier comment about like the language, and like if we're talking, if we're setting, either receiving a boundary or setting a boundary, and that the intent is just like, hey, this is what works for me, and this doesn't, or not now, but later. And like that softness and kind of coming from love, I guess, in your language than Pia, versus a harsh, like I need to control you or set this boundary because I'm afraid. So that's all like I feel like this where we meet, like these are my needs, these are your needs. How can we meet in kind of a soft, caring way? I guess like that's kind of where I see the boundary.
Yeah, what comes to my mind is merging. We've been kind of talking about this when it comes to the mother-child bond. That there in the beginning there's merging that happens, and the process of letting go is defining two separate people, right? Differentiation, and where does one person start and the other person end, and then how do you put words to that? How do you communicate that energetically as well as verbally and cognitively? And I think it is an art, and we have to figure it out, and you have to know what your own boundaries are and know what your thoughts are, what your feelings are, and then find a way to say them in a way that is received by the other person and not defended against. And it's tricky. It's hard to do, but that's what we're all trying to figure that out.
We're all
When
learning.
I work with a client who's having troubles with boundaries, I bring it around to, well, what value that you hold dearly is being stepped on here? And how would you express that in a respectful way to someone? It's like, and coming from that self-sourced emotional state, I think helps to create language that is more kinder and direct at the same time. It's like, yeah, that won't work for me because and then that takes you to a whole new place in terms of communication and connecting.
Yeah, one of the things that we do in psychotherapy is teach people about I statements, right? Is what you always want to come from, I feel da 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 da, I feel this, I would like this. And that way the other person is able to receive, hopefully, what it is that you want without feeling like they're not doing something or they feeling too demanded upon.
I work with a lot of women who are single and wanting to have a partner. And it's really common for them to start out wanting a man who's similar to them, and the ways in which they feel he should be similar. Often it's a lengthy list, but actually tons of those things don't matter at all to long-term happiness. In other words, closeness and harmonious, happy relationships can happen across many different kinds of differences. There are certain similarities that are important. It matters to know which one, but can you connect through a difference? In other words, is it possible? We have this idea that someone should be similar to us in order for us to connect to them. But I think it's really a developmental achievement and something to be sought, which is to connect through difference. In other words, to appreciate the richness, to be curious about the otherness, and to feel how much the otherness expands you. Because I think that's so interesting, Jody, what you were saying earlier, that we have this idea that less of a boundary means more of a connection. But I think we also have this idea that more similarity necessarily means more of a connection. And I don't think that's necessarily true.
Thank you. I love that point, because I know couples that are happy and functioning very well. And it takes a fair amount of communication to make that happen, because their experiences are different from one another, and the way they go about things are different. So, getting back to, Cynthia's point is the I statements, right? And Susan and the I statements, and how to express your needs. And how to express the boundaries of, I don't do it this way. I'm more comfortable doing it that way in a work situation, for example. Does anybody have any additional languaging that our listeners can use? Just throw it out there, whatever you'd like to
I'd
say.
like to offer not so much a languaging right now. It has some, I think Cynthia touched on this, or Susan. To allow ourselves to feel the boundary that has been crossed, or support our client in feeling the boundary that has been crossed, meaning be in that vulnerable place that may feel weak, but it's actually a place of great power to find out where that wound is, and then feel that and know, oh, this is my place, my line. This is what I have to define for myself, where it's okay and where it's not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're talking about introspection, really knowing what's happening on the inside. How does that person's actions or thoughts or words affect me internally? And then, is that okay with me or not? And then how do I then work with that? And how do I set the limit in a way that is kind, but also empowering for myself?
Another kind of boundary that, of course, I have to mention, of course, is if you take on a big project like completing a book, right? Everything in the world is going to come up to interfere with your doing that. And it's so important to give yourself permission to have that thing that you want, have that big, hairy, bodacious goal, and go for it and give yourself that. And that's a different kind of boundary as well. That it's a boundary that eliminates boundaries, if that makes any sense. You're giving yourself direct permission to have that thing, and that requires you to establish other kinds of boundaries. Would love to go on that camping trip. I'm doing my line edits this weekend, or whatever priority you have that is taking your time. It's a temporary kind of boundary, because once the project is done, then you're free to book your time any way you want to. But if it's truly a priority, you have to say, I have time for this, or I have time for that. I don't have time for both.
This is the saying no to get to yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you're getting the big yes is what you want in the end. Yes.
Well, I would go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's hard. It's hard to do that. I had to set limits with myself. Yesterday, I was trying to work on a project, and it was like, no, this is my boundary. This is what I need to get done. Yes, the sun is shining. I want to be outside, but no, this is it. And so I think bringing it back to the fact that this isn't necessarily easy, right? Self boundaries can be really hard. But like you said, the end game, the end goal of accomplishing this thing is, we have to keep that in mind and set the limits to make that happen.
So I remember my mother used to create this protective bubble around my father when he came home, because whatever he wanted to do was so important it could not be interrupted without prior agreement, and think about what it would be like if someone was creating a boundaried space for you, so that all the or what, like an administrative assistant, right? They field everything so that you're not interrupted behind your protected wall. And so if you don't have that, and society doesn't allow it, expect it, support it, etc., you're the one who's constantly going, oh, it's here, or today it's here, today there isn't one,
Yeah, I think it's in The Incredibles. Did you guys see the movie The Incredibles? I think it's the daughter's superpower is to draw a bubble around her.
Right.
It's awesome. Sorry, Jody, I interrupted you.
No, I love that image. Love that image. I wanted to see that. I'm going to just speak about what I've heard. This is an exercise that I work with my business clients, and it is getting self-care in your life, having a strong work-life boundary, and making sure that in some time of the day, whatever time people need, it could be an hour, it could be 2 hours, is just to protect that time to either get things done, or to go on a walk, or to meditate, or to make that day richer. And this is ongoing. Again, it can be 20 minutes to 3 to 4 hours, depending on what that person needs to have that balance and to complete daily projects. So, Cynthia, I'm going to just throw out that they don't need the big bodacious project in order to have self-care in your life, because burnout is a really let's just say it gets in the way of achieving our goals because we're too tired to do it. So, although I love bodacious goals.
Yeah,
great.
and I like how, like, this kind of protecting the time, it's so essential in creating focus in our days. And again, kind of back to what do you need to say yes to like fully say, or no to fully say yes to the thing you're actually committing to, whether it's, these next 5 minutes or the day or the whatever, that it's a very deliberate choice and a boundary, in a sense that you're setting it with yourself, that I'm prioritizing this, actually. This is important to me, so I'm going to remove distractions, maybe set expectations with other people, like sort of create that bubble for myself, essentially, to make it possible to give my attention fully to that.
I love Gail's bubble idea. I want to adopt that. I want a bubble.
I want a VA. I want an assistant who says, leave her alone. She'll be available after 12. Can I take a message?
Delegating the boundary setting.
Delegating, right. And
with COVID, we were all working from home. My husband, myself, my daughter was in school. She was so we were all in separate parts of the room. I had a note on my door, I'm in session, or, and actually everybody had the boundary at the door, and people were pretty respectful of that too. So just another way of creating boundaries, even in the midst of COVID.
Yeah, and I think it models, I think people tend to respect your time more when you say, I'm taking this time to complete some things, I'll be available after 1. Feel free to contact me there. And again, it shows people that you are focused, that you are organized, and that you are protecting yourself to get something done. And it models for other people to say, wow, maybe I can do that without feeling guilty, or without having to look productive 24/7 or available on my cell phone 24/7. So I think the more we do that as coaches and therapists, the more our clients will get it to say, wow, what will that bring to my life? What kind of peace, focus, joy can I make happen, and in creating those daily boundaries?
And I think also on the receiving end of a clear boundary is actually a gift to get that, because then it takes out all the guesswork and wondering and, you know, too much fluidness and trying to figure out. So if someone says, you know, yes, I can help you, and this is the time, or only after, you know, next weekend or whatever, it's like, oh, okay, I can work with that. So that clarity, it's actually a gift as well.
A version of that, Ulrika, just to take it a bit further, would be just what I've started doing is, if somebody asks me for something, even if I have the time immediately, I go, when do you need that? And it makes them stop and think about, you know, is everything just urgently right now needed? Or is this something we can actually do with some time and thought, and do it in a more graceful way?
Yeah, we can assume that, you know, it's easy to assume that when someone has a request of us that is like, oh, like now. And I had a potential client I'm talking to now that I kind of felt bad saying, but we probably can't do that until like August sometime. And she's like, perfect, because I have these other things going on. So yes. So like sometimes it's actually, you know, perfect for the other person too. Now someone has to start saying it, and then it can kind of fall in place. Yeah.
I want to follow up on the guesswork idea, Ulrika, that you were bringing up. Again, with couples, you know, a lot of times women are under the assumption that if they're not clear with boundaries, then they're being sort of more welcoming and more warmer and more agreeable. But actually, what happens to the partner? Let's say you have a partner who wants to please you. They don't know what to do to please you because you haven't said, this is the thing I need. And so actually, what if the other person was a people pleaser, but in a good way, and you were the people they wanted to please? You need to say what it is that you want in order to make that successful.
I love that.
Yeah, I think an overall theme that I'm hearing in this discussion is, you know, ask for what you need, either, you know, internally, and then express it externally. You know, I can't do that now because I need to work on this project, and I can look at that after the weekend, or help you out after the weekend. So I think it really does come down to understanding what you need, and I'm going to throw in, you know, what self-care you're going to have on a regular basis, and then express it.
And, you know, you still may disappoint people in the meet. Like, people may feel disappointed, and that's okay. I think normalizing that sometimes other people might have, you know, have an issue with boundaries that we set. It's just human nature. It's okay. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you setting the boundary just because somebody else feels disappointed.
I'm suddenly aware that all of us are self-employed and very curious about those of you who've worked in corporate America, you know, who've had bosses. How does this go over in other kinds of workplaces where you're not the person who is your own employer?
Well, my experience in corporate, my experience was I had to follow the tone or the prompts of my boss, his boss, and just the corporation in general, how they operated, just to feel safe in my position, honestly. And it was it didn't allow me to be my best person. It didn't allow me to give my best contribution. And so they didn't get the best of me, and they don't even know they didn't. And it's just not fun, you know.
You didn't have the freedom. You didn't feel you had the freedom to set boundaries according to your own promptings.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think in corporate, like thinking like what boundaries mean in the context of being a corporate employee. Like one thing is like work-life balance, setting boundaries as far as those kind of things. But I think where I worked, it was a good culture. So I think it probably is more around what is the culture of the particular company, and to what extent are you kind of part of creating the team dynamics, and like where if it's like all very set and this is the way things are and you better fit in or otherwise kind of like what you're saying, Pia, or if it's more like, I think where I was, there was more collaborative. I felt like I had more of a say in how we worked where I was.
That's a great experience to have. Yeah.
And I think post-pandemic, what I've been experiencing in working with businesses and corporate businesses and teams is they value mental health more than ever. They also value retaining employees more than ever. They want to keep the talent. They want to keep people happy. So, they're thinking of these things more. They're allowing more freedom where they were very rigid on time. I'm working with somebody who is now saying that he's able to talk to his boss about taking that, 2 hours to do what he needs to do in a kind of a lighter flowing way, and then he'll get back to people at a certain time. And he had that conversation with his boss, and his boss said, "Yeah, I'm whatever you need to do, because mental health at this company is key."
Well,
So,
I think that COVID has essentially changed the workplace so dramatically, where it's like 5 years ago, we would not have seen this wave of people working remotely and everybody mostly being okay with it. It took a pandemic to do it. And thank you, COVID, for that reset, for that adjustment, because it's really revealed a lot of weaknesses in the systems. And like the example that you provided, Jody, it's like it was a wake-up call. We better care about the emotional well-being of the people that we depend on for whatever widget it is that we're producing collaboratively as a team. It's finally, I think it's really it's gratifying to see that kind of perspective being more mainstream.
absolutely.
And it
We have
also
just,
kind
oh,
of,
go ahead,
yeah,
Ulrika.
no, I just wanted to add to that this, what you were summarizing kind of, Jody, like, no, be clear what you need and ask for it, even in those situations. Like if you ask for, even in a corporate environment, whatever culture, kind of daring to ask for what you need, and maybe you get a no, or maybe there's some conversation at least that can start. And I think if you ask in a way that it's like, this is where I come from, or this is like why I'm asking for this. Like I used to bring my dog to work, and I remember feeling kind of guilty taking him out for a walk. But then I realized that I did my best thinking when I took my dog for a walk. So like it was okay in that environment, but I imagine too, if I would have had to ask my boss or like kind of say that, is it okay if I take my dog out? Because actually I come up with the best solutions and ideas when I do that. And then, maybe things are more possible sometimes also than we dare to believe.
Right.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more possibility for problem solving, and for tuning into what it is that we need, and then finding a way to go to bosses and go to other employees and be able to communicate that and figure out, well, it might not be exactly what we would do if we were working independently, but is there some negotiation that can happen? Yeah, it seems like there's more of that happening now.
again, asking for what you need and explaining why you need it, which is great on both Susan and Ulrika's points. Well, we have just another few minutes. Would anybody like to add anything on boundaries for our listeners?
I have a client I was just thinking of who had a really hard time setting boundaries, and we worked on this for a number of years, actually. At work, work and everywhere else, she didn't set boundaries, and her boss, therefore, didn't understand how much she was doing. And she asked for a raise, and he said no. And then we developed a list of everything she was doing that was above and beyond her job description and above and beyond the number of hours she was being paid for. And then she sent it to him and she said, I have not said no. And this is what I have been doing because I have not said no. And therefore, this is the amount of money you need to be paying me. And he couldn't believe all of the things, all of her labor, effort, and genius that had been invisible until she drew his attention to it. And so one thing about setting a boundary, it really is a direct translation of saying, I am of value, my time is of value, and I'm in charge of whatever, distributing it out to the world.
Great point. I love that success story, Gail. That's great. Yes, we have to communicate again, not only our needs, but what we are doing. All right. We are out of time. And I'd like to thank all of you for this very stimulating and very gratifying conversation. And I would just really appreciate what you all have to say on this hard topic. All right, everybody, you take care, and it's been wonderful talking with you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you.
Jody. Thanks, everybody.
You.